"Where's Carter?" The voice burst through the radio with a level of urgency nobody on the team had ever heard before. For a split second, every head turned toward the same person. Not the squad leader, not the senior instructor, not the toughest soldier in the unit. They all looked at Emily Carter, the woman they had spent weeks calling weak. Emily stood from her seat inside the transport vehicle, her expression calm while alarms sounded in the distance and anxious voices filled the airwaves. Outside, the afternoon sun hung low over the rugged training range, casting long shadows across the dusty landscape. The mission had started like dozens before it. Routine, predictable, safe. Then everything changed. But before anyone could understand why the entire operation suddenly seemed to depend on Emily Carter, you have to go back 3 weeks to the day she arrived at Falcon Ridge Base. At first glance, Emily didn't look like someone destined to impress anyone. She stood just over 5 feet 5 inches tall, with a lean frame and a quiet demeanor that made her easy to overlook. While other soldiers talked loudly about fitness scores, marksmanship rankings, and future promotions, Emily usually kept to herself. She listened more than she spoke. She worked more than she complained. And somehow, that made her an easy target. The nickname started on her second day, Base Princess. Nobody could remember exactly who said it first, but it spread quickly. A few soldiers laughed. Then more joined in. Before long, the entire training company knew the name. Emily heard it every day. She heard it during morning runs when she finished in the middle of the pack. She heard it during obstacle courses when stronger recruits climbed faster than she did. She heard it in the dining hall, in the barracks, and even during field exercises. Most people assumed she didn't belong there. Sergeant Ryan Walker certainly believed it. Ryan was respected across the base for his confidence and physical ability. He believed military success came from strength, aggression, and dominance. Emily represented none of those things. Whenever he watched her train, he saw someone average, someone ordinary, someone who would eventually quit. "She won't last 6 months," he told another instructor one afternoon while watching recruits complete a land navigation exercise. Emily, standing nearly 50 yards away, appeared not to hear him. She simply studied her map, checked her compass, and continued walking. That was what confused people most about her. She never argued. She never defended herself. She never demanded respect. The insults seemed to pass right through her. Yet every morning she arrived before sunrise. Every evening she stayed after training ended. While others talked about success, Emily quietly prepared for it. Most people never noticed. And those who did dismissed it as determination without talent. They thought they understood Emily Carter. They thought they had her figured out. What nobody realized was that the mission waiting just ahead would reveal a side of her that would change every opinion on the base forever. The following week settled into a rhythm that seemed to confirm every assumption people had made about Emily Carter. Each morning began before dawn with physical training across the rolling hills surrounding Falcon Ridge Base. Recruits pushed through long runs, endurance drills, and obstacle courses designed to expose weaknesses. Ryan Walker always finished near the front. Emily usually finished somewhere in the middle. To most observers, that was all the evidence they needed. One chilly morning, the company gathered around a large terrain model for a tactical planning exercise. The objective looked simple enough. Teams had to study a map, identify potential risks, and recommend the safest route through unfamiliar terrain. Ryan immediately took charge of his group. His confidence drew attention, and several recruits eagerly followed his lead. Across the room, Emily sat quietly with a notebook in front of her. She spoke only when asked a direct question. When the exercise ended, the instructors reviewed each team's recommendations. Ryan's group received praise for speed and decisiveness. Then Captain Daniel Brooks, one of the senior training officers, pointed to a detail everyone else had missed. A narrow valley along Ryan's chosen route created a communications blind spot that could leave an entire team isolated. The room fell silent. Captain Brooks then held up another map. "There was only one recruit who identified this issue," he said. Several heads turned as he revealed the name written at the top of the page. Emily Carter. The reaction lasted only a moment before people returned to their routines. Ryan dismissed it as luck. Others assumed she had guessed correctly. Emily never corrected them. She simply returned to work. Similar moments began appearing more often. During navigation exercises, she consistently arrived at checkpoints without wasting movement. During planning sessions, she noticed patterns others overlooked. During equipment inspections, she found problems before they became serious. None of it looked dramatic. None of it attracted applause. But Captain Brooks noticed. So did a handful of instructors who quietly began watching her more closely. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled across the training grounds while recruits were completing a field exercise. Winds increased. Visibility dropped. Several teams became disoriented and started drifting off course. Emily studied the changing weather conditions for less than a minute before adjusting her route. Hours later, her team was the only one to arrive exactly where they were supposed to be. Even then, she accepted no credit. "Good teamwork," she said when another recruit congratulated her. That answer only fueled Ryan's frustration. He wanted clear proof that Emily was not as capable as people were beginning to suspect. Yet every time an opportunity appeared, she quietly solved problems without drawing attention to herself. One evening, Ryan watched her leave the training center long after everyone else had gone. Through a window, he could see her studying maps, reviewing mission reports, and taking notes under the glow of a single desk lamp. For the first time, uncertainty crept into his mind. He still believed she was out of place. He still believed she lacked the toughness required for real operations. But he could not explain why the instructors kept paying attention to her. What Ryan did not know was that Falcon Ridge Base was about to receive unexpected deployment orders. Within days, training would end, and the lessons people thought they had learned about Emily Carter would be tested in a way no classroom or obstacle course could ever measure. The announcement came just after sunrise. Recruits filled the briefing hall expecting another ordinary day of training, but the atmosphere felt different the moment they walked inside. Senior officers stood along the walls. Large maps covered the front screens. Conversations faded as Captain Daniel Brooks stepped to the podium. "Listen up," he said. "Effective immediately, selected personnel from Falcon Ridge Base will support an operational deployment exercise connected to an active readiness mission." A ripple moved through the room. This was not part of the original training schedule. For weeks, everyone had been focused on evaluations, certifications, and competition. Now something more serious had entered the picture. Emily Carter sat quietly near the back row, her notebook already open. Around her, excitement spread quickly. Some recruits smiled. Others whispered about finally getting a chance to prove themselves. Ryan Walker leaned back in his chair with obvious confidence. This was exactly the kind of opportunity he had been waiting for. Real responsibility, real pressure, real consequences. In his mind, this would finally expose who belonged and who did not. Captain Brooks began reading names. Each selected soldier would join a support element attached to an operational task force for a limited assignment. When Ryan's name was called, he nodded proudly. A few seats away, several recruits congratulated him. Then Captain Brooks continued reading. Specialist Emily Carter. The room became noticeably quieter. Ryan turned toward her. Several recruits exchanged confused looks. One of them even laughed softly. "You have got to be kidding," someone muttered. Emily showed no reaction. She simply wrote something in her notebook and listened to the rest of the briefing. After dismissal, conversations erupted across the base. Some believed Emily had been selected because instructors liked her. Others assumed administrative mistakes had been made. Ryan found himself surrounded by recruits eager to discuss the decision. "This is going to be interesting," one of them said. Maybe they needed someone to carry paperwork. A few laughed. Ryan smiled but said nothing. Deep down, he expected the deployment to answer every question. If Emily was truly out of her depth, reality would reveal it quickly. Later that afternoon, the selected personnel gathered for preparation meetings. Equipment was inspected. Assignments were reviewed. Procedures were explained. Throughout the process, Emily remained focused and attentive. While others joked and speculated, she studied every detail presented on the screen. At one point, an officer described a potential communications challenge involving difficult terrain. Before anyone else spoke, Emily raised her hand and calmly suggested an alternate relay position that would improve coverage. The room grew silent. The officer paused, reviewed the map, and nodded. "That would work," he admitted. Several soldiers glanced toward Emily. Once again, she had noticed something others missed. Yet the moment passed quickly. Outside the building, Ryan convinced himself it meant nothing. One smart observation could happen by chance. What mattered now was performance under pressure. Within 48 hours, the team would leave Falcon Ridge Base. And for the first time since Emily arrived, everyone would be tested far beyond the limits of training grounds and classroom exercises. 2 days later, the convoy rolled out before dawn beneath a sky filled with low gray clouds. The mission itself was not classified, but it carried enough importance to place every soldier on alert. The objective was simple on paper: support an operational readiness exercise across a remote training region nearly 80 miles from Falcon Ridge Base. Yet everyone understood that conditions in the field rarely followed paper plans. Inside the lead transport vehicle, conversations drifted between confidence and nervous anticipation. Ryan Walker sat near the front, reviewing assignments and mentally preparing for what he expected would be his opportunity to stand out. Across from him, Emily Carter quietly checked equipment lists one final time. She moved with the same calm focus she had displayed throughout training. No dramatic speeches, no attempts to impress anyone, just careful preparation. As the vehicles traveled deeper into the rugged landscape, the terrain began to change. Rolling hills gave way to narrow roads and dense stretches of woodland. Radio traffic increased. Weather reports shifted throughout the morning as strong winds moved into the area. Around midday, the convoy paused at a temporary operations site where teams received updated instructions. Officers gathered personnel around a series of maps and digital displays. New information required route adjustments. Several checkpoints would need to be moved due to changing environmental conditions. While most soldiers focused on the updated destinations, Emily's attention stayed fixed on the terrain itself. Her eyes moved across elevation lines, communication zones, and weather overlays. After several minutes, she quietly approached one of the planners. "Sir," she said, pointing to a section of the map, "if the winds continue shifting from the west, this area could interfere with signal coverage between teams." The planner studied the map. Another officer joined him. Soon both men were discussing possibilities that had not been considered during the briefing. Ryan watched from a distance. Again, Emily had noticed something before everyone else. Again, senior personnel seemed interested in her observations. The pattern was becoming difficult to ignore. Later that afternoon, the convoy resumed movement. Conditions gradually became more challenging. Visibility fluctuated as clouds thickened overhead. Communication checks became more frequent. Small delays forced teams to adjust schedules. None of it qualified as a crisis. But the smooth confidence many recruits carried from training began to fade. Real operations demanded flexibility. Real operations introduced uncertainty. As evening approached, personnel established a temporary staging area. Tents were assembled. Equipment was organized. Final plans were reviewed for the following day. Around a portable briefing table, Ryan listened as team leaders discussed responsibilities. Then something unexpected happened. One of the officers asked Emily a direct question regarding route coordination. She answered immediately, outlining several contingencies and backup communication options. The response was clear, detailed, and practical. For a brief moment, nobody spoke. Then the officer nodded. "Good thinking, Carter." Ryan felt an unfamiliar sensation. It was not anger. It was doubt. The version of Emily he had constructed in his mind no longer matched the evidence in front of him. Yet he still believed the real test had not arrived. Planning was one thing. Preparation was another. Tomorrow would bring pressure, uncertainty, and decisions that could not be solved with maps alone. And as darkness settled across the remote staging area, nobody realized that the most important challenge of the entire deployment was already beginning to unfold. The next morning began with an uneasy silence that seemed to settle over the entire staging area. Soldiers moved through their routines, but the relaxed confidence from earlier days had disappeared. Weather conditions continued shifting across the region, creating new challenges for every team involved in the operation. Shortly after sunrise, updated instructions arrived from command. Several units would be repositioned throughout the day to support a large-scale readiness exercise spread across multiple sectors. The assignment sounded straightforward. Coordinate movement, maintain communication, and adapt to changing conditions. Yet experienced personnel understood that simple missions often became complicated for reasons nobody could predict. Ryan Walker welcomed the challenge. This was finally the environment he trusted most. Action, decision-making, responsibility. As vehicles prepared to move, he checked his equipment one final time and glanced toward Emily Carter. She stood near a communications station reviewing maps with quiet concentration. While others focused on destinations, Emily seemed focused on everything in between. Roads, terrain, elevation changes, communication routes, patterns that most people overlooked. By mid-morning, teams were spread across a large operational area. Radio traffic increased steadily as weather conditions created small disruptions throughout the region. Nothing serious, just enough complications to force constant adjustments. At first, the changes appeared manageable. Then reports began arriving faster. A scheduled route became unavailable. A support team experienced communication delays. Updated coordinates needed to be transmitted across multiple sectors. Personnel who had spent weeks training suddenly found themselves balancing several problems at once. During one coordination meeting, multiple voices spoke across the radio simultaneously. Information overlapped. Clarifications were requested. Confusion slowly began creeping into the process. Emily listened carefully without saying a word. Then she noticed something. Several communication reports were referencing slightly different timing windows. Individually, the discrepancies seemed insignificant. Together, they created a growing risk that separate teams could begin operating from outdated information. Emily immediately brought the issue to a supervising officer. He reviewed the data, compared the reports, and quickly realized she was right. Corrective instructions were sent before the situation could expand into a larger problem. "Good catch, Carter," the officer said. The words were brief, but Ryan heard them. "So did everyone nearby?" For a moment, nobody spoke. Emily simply nodded and returned to work. As the day continued, the pace accelerated. Additional adjustments arrived from command. Teams moved between sectors. Communication networks became increasingly busy. The operation remained under control, but pressure continued building beneath the surface. Late that afternoon, dark clouds rolled across the horizon. Wind strengthened. Visibility began fluctuating once again. Personnel exchanged concerned looks while checking forecasts. Conditions were changing faster than expected. Ryan felt the shift immediately. The mission was no longer following its original plan. Around him, experienced leaders began preparing for contingencies. Backup routes were reviewed. Emergency communication procedures were verified. Everyone sensed that the next 24 hours could determine whether the operation succeeded or struggled. As evening approached, a new transmission arrived that caused several officers to gather around a map table. Nobody explained the details to the rest of the personnel. They did not need to. The expressions on their faces said enough. Something significant was developing. And as Emily quietly studied the updated information from across the room, she seemed to recognize the warning signs before anyone else. By dawn the following morning, the operation had entered its most demanding phase. Thick clouds covered the sky, and strong winds continued sweeping across the region. Communication traffic filled every available channel as teams moved between checkpoints spread across dozens of miles of difficult terrain. Inside the temporary command center, officers monitored updates arriving from multiple sectors at once. What had started as a routine readiness exercise was rapidly becoming a test of coordination and leadership. Ryan Walker felt the pressure building with every passing hour. Reports arrived faster than they could be reviewed. Routes changed. Timelines shifted. Several teams found themselves working from information that was accurate one moment and outdated the next. During training, problems usually appeared one at a time. Out here, they arrived all at once. Mid-morning brought the first major complication. A communications relay station positioned along a ridgeline suddenly stopped responding. No emergency signal. No explanation. Just silence. Immediately, radio coverage across several sectors became unreliable. Messages were delayed. Updates arrived incomplete. Command personnel began searching for alternatives, but every solution required time. Time was exactly what nobody felt they had. Ryan joined a planning group tasked with coordinating movement between affected teams. Voices overlapped around the operations table. Different suggestions competed for attention. Some recommended waiting for restored communication. Others argued for immediate adjustments. The discussion grew increasingly tense as uncertainty spread. Throughout the room, people searched maps and screens for answers. Emily Carter stood quietly near the edge of the table, studying information as it appeared. Then she noticed something. The weather system moving across the region was following a slightly different pattern than earlier forecasts predicted. Most personnel focused on the communication outage itself. Emily focused on what would happen next. She stepped forward and pointed toward a section of the map. If the winds continue moving east at this speed, this valley may provide a temporary communication corridor, she said. Several officers examined the terrain. One began comparing signal projections. Another reviewed weather data. Within minutes, they realized Emily's assessment might work. A revised plan was created and transmitted to field units. Slowly, communication quality improved. Not completely, not permanently, but enough to stabilize operations. Relief spread throughout the command center. Ryan watched the entire process unfold. Nobody celebrated. Nobody made dramatic speeches. Yet a problem that had seemed overwhelming only minutes earlier had been reduced because Emily noticed a detail everyone else overlooked. The day continued. Additional complications appeared. Equipment issues, route changes, delayed reports. Each challenge increased the workload for everyone involved. Yet Emily remained remarkably calm. While stress affected others, she seemed to grow more focused. Her attention never drifted. Her decisions never felt rushed. Late that afternoon, a sudden priority transmission arrived from another sector. Personnel gathered around the nearest radio station as the message played across the room. Several officers exchanged serious looks. Whatever was happening elsewhere required immediate coordination from multiple teams. The atmosphere changed instantly. Ryan felt it. Everyone did. Then a familiar voice came across the radio. "Where is Carter?" For a moment, the room went completely silent. Emily looked up from her maps. Every head turned toward her. And for the first time since arriving at Falcon Ridge Base, Ryan realized that the person many had dismissed as the weakest soldier in the unit might actually be the one everyone had been depending on all along. The question hanging in the command center seemed almost unreal. "Where is Carter?" The voice on the radio belonged to Colonel Nathan Reeves, a senior officer overseeing operations across the entire region. Ryan Walker stared at Emily as she calmly stepped toward the communications table. There was no surprise on her face, no hesitation, no sign that she felt honored by the attention. She simply picked up a headset and listened. Around her, officers quickly explained the situation. Multiple teams were operating across separate sectors. Weather conditions continued shifting. Communication routes were under constant pressure. Several planned movements now depended on information arriving from different locations at exactly the right time. The challenge was not danger. The challenge was coordination. One mistake could create confusion across the entire exercise. Emily listened for less than a minute before asking a series of precise questions. Which teams had confirmed their positions? Which sectors still experienced signal interruptions? Which route adjustments had already been approved? Her voice remained calm and professional. The room gradually became quieter as people realized she was identifying details they had overlooked. Within minutes, Emily spread several maps across the table and began organizing information. She created a revised communication sequence, prioritized updates by urgency, and established backup timing windows in case weather conditions worsened. What seemed like a tangled mess of reports and conflicting schedules suddenly began making sense. Officers started following her recommendations. Team leaders adjusted procedures. Updated instructions moved through the network. Slowly, order replaced confusion. Ryan watched in disbelief. During training, he had always measured strength through physical performance. He had assumed leadership meant speaking the loudest or acting the fastest. Yet Emily was doing something entirely different. She was solving problems before they became larger problems. More importantly, people trusted her judgment. As the afternoon continued, new challenges appeared. A support convoy needed alternate routing. A communication relay required repositioning. Updated weather forecasts forced another revision of movement schedules. Each time, Emily evaluated the information, identified priorities, and offered practical solutions. Not once did she raise her voice. Not once did she seek recognition. She simply focused on helping the mission succeed. Several hours later, the operation stabilized. Reports flowed smoothly between sectors. Timelines returned to normal. Teams completed objectives without additional disruption. Inside the command center, tension finally began to fade. Colonel Reeves arrived shortly before sunset to review the day's events. After receiving updates from his officers, he walked directly toward Emily. The room fell silent. Ryan felt his pulse quicken. He sensed something important was about to happen. The colonel extended his hand. "Excellent work today, Specialist Carter," he said. "Your recommendations prevented a very difficult situation from becoming much worse." Emily shook his hand politely. "Just doing my job, sir." The colonel smiled. "That may be true, but not everyone could have done it." As he walked away, nobody spoke for several seconds. Ryan looked around the room. The same people who had once laughed at Emily now watched her with genuine respect. And for the first time since she arrived at Falcon Ridge Base, nobody seemed interested in calling her weak. The operation concluded the following morning with a level of success that exceeded initial expectations. Teams began returning from their assigned sectors, equipment was packed, and temporary command posts slowly came down across the region. For the first time in days, conversations sounded lighter. The pressure that had dominated every decision was finally beginning to lift. Yet one topic continued appearing in nearly every discussion. Emily Carter. Soldiers who had barely noticed her a week earlier now spoke about her calm decision-making, her attention to detail, and her ability to solve problems before they spread. What surprised many people was not that she had performed well. It was how naturally she had done it. There had been no dramatic speeches, no attempts to take control, no effort to impress anyone. She simply stepped forward whenever the mission required it. Back at Falcon Ridge Base, personnel gathered inside the main briefing hall for the official after-action review. Rows of soldiers filled the room as officers summarized lessons learned from the deployment. Ryan Walker sat quietly near the center. He found himself paying closer attention than usual. Something told him the story was not over. Colonel Nathan Reeves entered shortly before the briefing began. The room immediately grew silent. After reviewing operational results, he paused and looked toward the front row where Emily sat. "There is something I would like everyone to understand," he said. His voice carried across the hall. "Many people saw Specialist Carter's performance during this operation. What most of you do not know is that this level of performance did not appear overnight." Several soldiers exchanged curious glances. The colonel motioned toward a screen. A personnel file appeared. Ryan leaned forward. The room became completely still. Over the next several minutes, details emerged that very few people had ever seen. Emily had previously supported multiple high-level readiness programs. She had been selected for advanced analytical training, usually reserved for far more experienced personnel. Several commanders had specifically requested her participation in planning exercises because of her ability to identify operational risks before others recognized them. One recommendation described her as a force multiplier. Another praised her judgment under pressure. A third stated that her greatest strength was not technical skill alone, but her ability to improve the performance of everyone around her. Ryan felt his stomach tighten. None of this matched the assumptions he had carried for weeks. The woman he had labeled weak had quietly built a reputation that extended far beyond Falcon Ridge Base. Colonel Reeves closed the file and looked around the room. "Some strengths are obvious," he said. "Others require time to recognize. Leadership is not always loud. Confidence is not always visible. And capability does not always look the way people expect." Nobody laughed. Nobody whispered. The room remained silent because everyone understood exactly what he meant. Ryan glanced toward Emily. She looked almost uncomfortable with the attention. While others might have enjoyed the recognition, she simply listened and waited for the briefing to continue. That reaction somehow impressed him even more. For weeks, she had endured criticism without complaint. Now she received praise without arrogance. And as the meeting ended, Ryan realized he had been wrong about her from the very beginning. The morning after the briefing felt different across Falcon Ridge Base. Nothing in the schedule had changed. Recruits still reported before sunrise. Training still began on time. Instructors still demanded the same discipline and effort. Yet something invisible had shifted. As soldiers gathered on the training field, conversations that once stopped when Emily Carter approached now continued naturally. People who had rarely acknowledged her presence offered simple greetings. Others nodded with quiet respect. None of it was dramatic. None of it needed to be. Ryan Walker arrived early and stood alone near the running track. For several minutes, he watched recruits assemble across the field. Then he saw Emily walking toward the training area carrying the same notebook she had carried since her first day at Falcon Ridge. Her pace was steady. Her expression was calm. She looked exactly the same as she always had. Ryan shook his head slightly. The strange thing was that nothing about Emily had changed. The only thing that had changed was everyone's understanding of who she had been all along. As she approached, Ryan stepped forward. For the first time since they met, he was unsure what to say. He had spent weeks judging her, weeks assuming he understood her capabilities, weeks believing confidence and competence always looked a certain way. Now every one of those assumptions felt foolish. Emily stopped when she noticed him. "Morning," she said. Ryan nodded. "Morning." For a moment neither spoke. Finally Ryan took a breath. "I owe you an apology." Emily looked at him without judgment. Ryan continued. "I thought I had you figured out from the beginning. I was wrong." Emily remained silent, allowing him to finish. "I spent more time judging you than actually paying attention," Ryan admitted. "That was my mistake." A faint smile appeared on Emily's face. Not a victorious smile, not a smug smile, just a genuine one. "We all make mistakes," she said. Ryan laughed quietly. "You are taking this better than I deserve." Emily adjusted the notebook under her arm. "The mission succeeded. That is what matters." Those words stayed with Ryan long after she walked away. There was no resentment in her voice, no desire to embarrass anyone, no interest in proving people wrong. She had spent weeks earning respect without ever demanding it. Minutes later, the company assembled for morning training. As recruits lined up, Captain Daniel Brooks stepped forward to begin the day's instructions. Before speaking, he glanced across the formation. His eyes briefly settled on Emily. Then he addressed everyone. "The strongest people are not always the loudest," he said. "The best leaders are not always the most visible. Never underestimate someone simply because they do not match your expectations." Nobody needed an explanation. Everyone understood the lesson. Training began. Recruits moved across the field beneath the rising sun. Ryan took his place beside the others and noticed something that would have seemed impossible only a few weeks earlier. Nobody called Emily Princess anymore. Nobody laughed when she spoke. Nobody questioned whether she belonged. They simply treated her like what she had always been, a professional. And as Falcon Ridge Base came to life around them, the lesson remained clear. Respect is not earned through appearances, opinions, or assumptions. It is earned through character, consistency, and actions when they matter most.